But in England, in the pre-modern world, the basic unit was, the economic and social unit was the household. The married couple that were at the center of the household were not considered separately. The unit was the household. Individuals weren't really thought of as economic units. And work happened within the household. And a lot of that would have been artisan work or subsistence agriculture. And it was gendered, but both sexes worked. So, for example, in an agrarian setting, men might produce raw materials and women process them into subsistence goods or products or utensils for the household. There was no question of one sex being economically dependent on the other. Both sexes, both men and women, were economically active in the context of a productive household. And for women, that happened in conjunction with raising children. Now, I'm not saying that all of this was idyllic necessarily. It came with its own problems and challenges. As I said, I don't believe in progress, but that also means I don't think things are getting worse. Things just change. But what happened when the Industrial Revolution transformed the way we work was that work left the home. The basic economic unit were gradually shifted from being a productive household to being individuals, implicitly male individuals working outside the home in a third workplace of some sort, so an office or a factory. And this left women with a dilemma which women had never really faced before, which is, what do you do? What we now call work-life balance had never really was, for women in the Middle Ages, that just wasn't a thing, because work and life were just all the same thing. And then suddenly you have this situation where you have to figure out, if work happens in a third place, let's say you're a working class woman in Manchester in the 19th century, you're breastfeeding a baby, but you also have to work a 12-hour shift, which is a 5-mile walk away. What do you do? It's a problem that women had never faced before. And so women responded in two characteristic ways. And really, this was originally mostly a bourgeois women's response. So those women who could afford to stay home and focus just on the home and the family did so. So the home became very much more of a private space for consumption and respite from economic competition and the market society, and the raising of children. And those women who could afford to inhabit that private domestic space would do so. And there was a huge body of writing that emerged out of that aspect of 19th century women's bourgeois domesticity. The so-called cult of domesticity, which second-wave feminist historiographers tend to read as anti-feminist, but which I read very straightforwardly as making the case for all of those things that women still did that were specifically connected to embodied female experience, motherhood, the raising of children, the life of the home, making the case for those things, over against this emerging market society, which is very much a place of competition and individualism, and to say these things still matter. We need to make space for them. And to me, that's very straightforwardly a kind of feminism. I think of this as the feminism of care and the feminism of interdependence. But then there was also another side to the same women's response, which focused much more on women's right to enter the market on the same terms as men. And this also had a huge amount of validity to it. Because, if you want to withdraw into bourgeois domesticity, that's great, as long as your husband likes you and is kind and is honorable and doesn't drink all the money away or beat you. But that's not always the case. And so there were a great many women who very understandably and rightly protested the fact that they were unable to divorce, they were unable to work, they had no custody rights to their children, they had no political personhood separate from men, because they were still living within a legal model that was created for productive households. And these women were saying, no, you don't realize this leaves us effectively the slaves of our husbands. And some of our husbands are not very nice men, as it turns out. So we need to do something about this. So the earliest women's movement has this polarity between those women making the case for care and interdependence within this new industrial context, and those women challenging our relegation to what they saw as a second-class sphere of care and interdependence, and women's right to enter the market on the same terms as men. These two sides don't always match up, but they're the two poles, the feminism of freedom and the feminism of care, which form, as I see it, the dialectic of the women's movement all the way up to the middle of the 20th century, at which point the feminism of freedom won conclusively.